Hello and welcome. Today we're looking at hand piecing. Sometimes when you see an old quilt, it can really inspire you, and it's great to be able to recreate that quilt or simply be inspired by it to make another quilt. If you love hand piecing as much as I do, I've got some great tips to share with you that will help you with your next hand piecing project. Firstly, let's take a look at the needle to use. I personally like a needle that has a very fine eye and a small shaft. So for me, I use either a quilting needle number 9 or number 10 because they're fairly short in length with a small eye and a narrow shaft, as distinct from a crewel embroidery needle, which is a little bit longer, the circumference is larger and the eye is a lot bigger. But it's a matter of personal choice which you prefer. When it comes to threading a needle, there are a few tips I've picked up. Firstly, if you're having trouble threading the needle in the usual way, which is taking the thread and putting it through the eye of the needle, instead of taking the thread to the needle, take the needle to the thread. So that is to hold the thread between your fingers and place the needle over the top, and you'll generally have success, like so. The other thing you can do with a small eye needle is turn it around, because when the needle was made, it's had the eye punched through it from one side. So in theory, one side of the needle eye is wider than the other. So if you turn it around and try the other side, that could work for you. The other thing I like to do, if I'm doing a lot of sewing, for example when I'm quilting, is to load my reel before I start stitching, because your eyes are fresh when you first start out, and you can load up to a dozen needles if you like in one sitting, and then as you sew, you just take one needle and pull the thread, then cut it and keep going, and you're not stopping and starting by having to rethread your needle all the time. So that works for me. The other thing to do when you're making your first knot when you start sewing is to tie a quilter's knot. And to do that, you take the end of the thread between your thumb and first finger, place the needle over the top, then wind the longer end of the thread around the needle 3 times, hang on to the wound section, and then pull the needle through, and there's your quilter's knot. I would not leave a tail that long. I would generally just snip it off so it's only 1/4 inch. Then when it comes to piecing, I've got some triangle shapes here that I cut out earlier using the pink templates. And what you would normally do is piece using a thread that will match the darker fabric that you're sewing together. In this case, I'm using hot pink only so that you can see my stitches. But it's important to use thread that matches the darker fabric so that when you open out your work, you don't see the stitches as easily. Then it's simply a matter of taking a pin, and where a pivot mark is on the fabric, pinning it through each pivot mark on each piece that you have. And what I do is I always start sewing from the darker side of the fabric, even if the lighter side is showing through to me, sorry. If I was sewing a dark fabric behind, I would come up with my needle from behind. So it's a matter of starting and then stitching 3 running stitches, starting with a back stitch, 3 running stitches, and running those stitches just inside the ruled pencil line, because we know that the pencil line is outside the original template shape area. So by stitching just inside the pencil line, you're keeping the original template shape. Pull 3 stitches through and then work a back stitch. So it's 3 stitches and a back stitch all the way. And then when you're coming to the end, it's just a matter of finishing off, and I've got a really good knot to show you when it comes to finishing the seam. And remember always to never sew past the seam line. I know on the sewing machine you would generally sew past the seam line, but with hand stitching it's good to leave it free, and then you can bend your seam back and forth as you wish to for the next piece that's being joined. So then when you come to the end, you sew through to the end, take out the pin, pull the needle through, then take the needle and put it through the same stitch again. And here's the trick. You take the thread through the eye of the needle under the needle, and you take the thread that's attached to the stitch under the needle in the opposite direction, and then pull it through. And you have a lovely flat knot that will never come undone. The pink templates and Gutermann thread I've used are available now from Craft Lovers Megastore. The thread comes in a 20 100 metre pack, and the templates are in a set of 15. So visit the Megastore today for these and other great craft products.